Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Reese and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off today's session in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting so everyone has a chance to join. In the meanwhile though, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know where you're joining from using the chat or the comments depending on what platform you're watching on, and tell us something that you'd like to get out of today's webinar. If there's any sort of use cases or anything specific that you'd like to apply learnings from this session to, then let us know in the chat, and maybe we can incorporate that into the Q&A. A few bits of housekeeping before we get going. The session is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to everyone that's registered for the event. If you haven't registered already, then you can head over to datacamp.com/webinars, or I will be sending a link to register in the chat shortly as well. So keep your eyes peeled in the chat. We are also going to have a Q&A towards the end of the session today. So if you have any questions at any point throughout the session, then let us know as soon as they spring to mind and we will save them for the Q&A as well. Final thing to note is, again, keep your eyes on the chat. I'm going to be sending resources throughout the session that are relevant for the topics we'll cover today. So keep your eyes peeled in the chat. Brilliant. I'll be back to repeat these messages for any new joiners shortly, but until then, enjoy the background music. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. My name is Reese and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off today's session in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting so everyone has a chance to join. In the meanwhile though, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know where you're joining from using the chat or the comments depending on what platform you're watching on, and tell us something that you'd like to get out of today's webinar. If you have anything that you'd like to apply learnings from this session to in terms of use cases and things like that, or problems that you've got, then let us know in the chat and we can talk about it in the Q&A that we'll have. For anyone that's just joined, the session is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to everyone that's registered for the event. If you haven't registered already, I've sent a link to do so in the chat, but you can also head over to datacamp.com/webinars and you'll be able to find today's session as well as our future sessions on there. As mentioned, we're going to have a Q&A, so if you have any questions at any point throughout the session, then please put your question in the chat or the comments and I'll be saving it for the Q&A as well. Final thing to note is keep an eye out in the chat for messages from me. I'm going to be sending resources and links in the chat to content that's relevant to today's topics. Brilliant. I'll be back to repeat these messages one final time for any new joiners shortly, but until then, enjoy the background music. Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. My name is Reese and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off the session in about 20 seconds or so. We've just been waiting so everyone has had a chance to join. Keep letting us know where you're joining from. It's always good to see the breadth of which the audience is. So great to see and connect with everyone from across the world. A few bits of housekeeping for anyone that's just joined. The session is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to everyone that's registered for the event. If you haven't registered already, keep an eye out in the chat. I've sent a link in there so you can get registered, or you can head to datacamp.com/webinars. We are going to have a Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have any questions at any point throughout the session, please let us know in the comments and I'll be saving them for the Q&A. And if we're getting lots of questions, we may even do a Q&A at the midpoint through the session. So if anything springs to mind, let us know. Outside of that, I'm going to be sending a few extra links in the chat, so keep an eye out for those as they'll be relevant to the topics that we're covering today. Brilliant. I think that's everything from me. So I'll now hand you over to your host for today's session, Richie. Richie, please take it away.
Welcome to the webinar. This is Richie. Now, I spend an awful lot of time both in these webinars and on the Data In podcast, just talking to data leaders about what's interesting to them. And one common argument I've had recently is me saying, oh, you know what, data science is brilliant, you can do anything with it. And then these data leaders saying, well, actually, data science is incredibly important, but it's not the end of it. It's not enough by itself. And what leaders really care about is being able to make decisions accurately and efficiently. And so the next big frontier is really decision science. And so today we're going to talk about how AI can help you make better decisions. And our guest is Arun Nandi. He's the Senior Director and Head of Data and Analytics at Unilever. So he's been recognized as one of the top 100 influential AI and analytics leaders. And he's got over 15 years of experience running analytics teams. And he's built data analytics practice from the ground up. So he's got a lot of experience in building and running data teams, as well as making use of AI. So without further ado, let me hand you over to Arun.
Thank you, Richie. Lovely to be here, and it's great to see all the attendees from all across the world. So, thank you everyone for joining, and hope this session can help you in your own journey on AI and decision making and how you're supporting that through your various initiatives. So let me start off by maybe giving you a little bit of an introduction to myself. And like many of you here, it's wonderful to see the audience from all across the globe on various from various places, time zones, etc. Um, I've had an opportunity to be, like many of you, a global citizen. So I've worked in and for different markets, from India, which is the country where I grew up in, to the US, where I have been for the past several years, and which is my home today in New York. I've had the opportunity to work in the Philippines and for Latin America as well. And over this time, with Unilever, I've had a great opportunity to traverse multiple roles in the organization. One of my proudest ones that I put out there is when I was leading the ice cream business and managing some amazing brands like Ben and Jerry's and Talenti and Magnum. For those of you who've had those, had an opportunity to taste those ice creams, very passionate about that. And at the bottom, you'll see a little bit about what my personal ambitions and my interests are. So I'm a big traveler. I've just come back from visiting my 42nd country. And these are just a few images from the past year of travel across the globe, from Guatemala to Vietnam, to some within the US as well. So that's a little bit about me. I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn, and happy to have a chat about any of this. So, moving on to why we're here, right? I want to break the session into three parts. The first foundational aspect is going to be related to data, and I'm gonna segue into how that's gonna support the people, and then into AI as well. So. Fundamentally, of course, this is probably no surprise to many of you practitioners out there. But why does a data foundation really matter? And what's the importance of it? Obviously, this is a topic that's been growing in prominence and relevance over the past several years. A data foundation was important, I would argue, 20 years ago, but it is imperative for organizations and individuals to have a clear grasp on how your data foundations really matter towards serving those downstream applications and to revolutionize the decision making of those different business processes and the various challenges that you face. So, if you look at why it's incredibly important today, you recognize that a lot of what we hear today is about public data, right? So you hear about a lot of the consumer facing applications that are really leveraging a lot of public data. But when you dive deeper into that, you recognize that really enterprise data is where a lot of the volume and the knowledge is as well. So that data, which is converted into information, which is then converted into knowledge, a lot of that rests within enterprises. And it's important for us to recognize that this private data that we are all working with on a day-to-day basis is really the crux of where the knowledge comes in, where you're going to use that data towards driving those applications that you're looking to build, right? And of course, when you look at why this data is important, so if you look at this hierarchy of needs, right, you always start at the bottom with the raw data itself, and then you build on that. You build your infrastructure, you build your pipelines, a lot of ETL, the various ways in which you're storing structured and unstructured data, and then of course you're moving on to the higher levels of this pyramid, where you are creating these solutions which can do a variety of different things, right? So they can do everything from classification to transformation, labeling, aggregation, etc. And of course, you're reaching the pinnacle of that with this artificial intelligence and the deep learning that we're all exposed to today. Now, if you see how this has evolved, you're going to see that generative AI, which is all the buzz today, is obviously going to address a large part of that ecosystem within those areas of application. But you do have to have these foundational building blocks in place for you to really enable that strategy. So it's hard to circumvent some of these foundational building blocks and move to the tiers in the higher parts of this pyramid without having that sound foundation of data and having that infrastructure and making those investments in not just your prioritization, but also in the way that that's evolving over time. Now, when you look at what most organizations are coming from, you're looking at um, probably something that you inherited, probably something that's the result of a legacy architecture, but you're really looking at certain silos that we've created over the past 10, 15, 20 years or so. So you have these systems of record, which are the sources of your data. You have your data platform, and the shape and the nature of these data platforms have evolved over time. But then you have this midstream layer, which is essentially going to be your use case specific logics and business rules that you're building in. And then you're providing support to each of these use cases. So it's fairly straight lined in terms of how this has often worked. And this might be familiar to many of you, where we're probably constantly dealing with what this looks like, this schematic of a data foundation or a data infrastructure looks like today. Now, but what this causes is that you're spending a significant amount of time on non-value added activities, right? So you're going to deal with the lack of a single version of truth, because you have multiple use cases which are all being served by different midstream layers and different articulations of documentation, of business rules, etc. And that's going to cause a lot of time that you're going to spend on these activities to really keep managing a lot of this architecture on a day-to-day basis. And you see that the organizations that have had the ability to make the changes into more efficient and more scalable and more sustainable architecture are the ones that are really leading this initiative from the forefront. And the others are going to still spend a significant amount of their capacity, your employees and your third parties that you're working with, your systems as well, are all going to be spending a significant amount of time on that, right? So what really is a sound data strategy which fits within these variables that we're talking about, right? So essentially, if you think of data as a product, right? So you then have the ability to conceptualize how you're going to deliver the downstream applications value through your data platforms and your systems of record. Those don't change, but your midstream layer is where the significant amount of re-engineering, or in some cases building it from the ground up, right? And that's really something that obviously has, as a concept, existed for a few years now, but bringing that to life is where a significant amount of strategy and prioritization is required to really take that to the next level. Now, if you look at data investments, right? So many of you as data and analytics practitioners are probably at a place where you're thinking about, yes, I need to make these investments within data, but my stakeholders that are really providing me some of this funding are also looking for quick wins. They're looking for low hanging fruit. They're looking for value to be delivered. So it is a trade-off, and it is a fine line that you've got to balance, which is the importance of making these long-term investments behind data strategy and between data foundations and some of these aspects that we spoke about. And of course, delivering analytics solutions which are providing value, analytics solutions, AI solutions, which are driving the different and more sophisticated ways of decision making. So it is something that you've got to juggle as priorities. And I'd say that having this sustainable investment really makes that easier, right? So I remember this conversation with a senior finance leader that I had, where we said, hey, here's what it takes for us to build a data lake and a data architecture and a modern data foundation, right? And one of the questions that came up was, okay, well, is this a 12-month investment or is this an 18-month investment? Because I think a lot of people think of it in that way, especially non-technical people do think of it that way, that this is a point in time investment that you would make, and then you're essentially set for the next few years. But unfortunately, that's not going to be the case, right? So you've got to set those expectations that this is a recurring investment. This is a sustained investment that you'd require to really make the data foundation as a critical enabler to those solutions that you're going to drive, right? And I'd say that the other probably misconception that's been floating around is also related to how a modern data architecture can really solve all your challenges with data quality, right? So if somebody's selling you that snake oil, think twice about it. Data architecture can alleviate a lot of the challenges that you have with your data, but it cannot entirely eliminate the challenges that you may encounter with data quality. And data quality is obviously driven by a lot of different aspects, a lot of different variables contribute to it. But it is important to ensure that you have those checks and balances in place, not just at source, but also anything that you're doing to continually invest behind having the right data quality. So let me move forward and talk a little bit about people, right? So people is a large and important aspect of it, but some of this may be familiar to you, right? Which in many organizations and in many places, this is the common thread, which is you hear that there are people in data which speak a certain language, and there are people in core functions or the business that speak a different language. And what you really need is people who can have the ability to speak both those languages. Now that bridge has to be has to really be met, right? So you've got to bridge that gap between what those expectations are and how you're going to deliver against it as a practitioner. And you may see that these two organizations or these two parts of the organizations are often at loggerheads, right? So they don't understand each other, because typically you're seeing a business strategy or a functional strategy, and you also have a data and a tech strategy. And if you ask me, the way that this needs to work is that a data strategy needs to be an enabler to the business strategy and not one that exists in isolation. So here's where the people that are interpreters of these two languages really come in, and those are the ones that can really help bridge this gap that is important. It was important 10 years ago when we started talking about this whole profile of purple people, but it is incredibly important today as well. In fact, I was interacting with a data leader at a large enterprise organization who mentioned to me that they did a capability assessment and found that there was one person amongst 4,000 within their organization that can really speak these two languages and what they would categorize as a purple person. So it just really accentuates the importance of nurturing this talent internally, and also making sure that you are really speaking the language of what business fundamentals you're trying to address, and then using data, technology, AI as enablers to that. In isolation, neither of those can really succeed to as great an extent as you can if you have the ability to combine the skills of the two, right? And I'd say that this is a great quote from Thomas Davenport, who's an accomplished writer within the space. If you've had an opportunity to read any of his books, then you know what I'm talking about. If not, I'd highly recommend some of his books related to analytics. These are both valuable skills and traits themselves, and how you bring those together is really the is going to determine how successful you are in doing that. And if I add that with a slightly different twist, right? So I happened to come across this children's book about how the world needs more purple people. This is an entirely different articulation of what purple people mean. But I thought that this was interesting because there were a few character traits and a few skills which were now part of this children's book, which actually made sense even from the data and the business aspects of how we are defining purple people, right? So these are people who bring communities together. I interpret this as essentially the ability to break some of those functional silos and work together, because you can really go much further when you work together. Um, asking those right questions, challenging and putting yourself out there and bringing yourself to the forefront when there are decisions to be made related to these teams. And of course, none of this can be achieved without the rigor and the hard work, and of course the kindness and courtesy that we're all looking for, whether in a work aspect or personally as well. So this is a great example of how you can achieve better outcomes when you start thinking of a stronger overlap between these core teams and other teams. Whenever I hear in organizations, people say, "Hey, somebody from the business came to me and said this," I already have a slight inkling of how I anticipate their organization to look like, which is on the right side of this chart, which is a little overlap, because you're essentially considering these individuals and these teams as being very different from yourselves. However, when you have that overlap, when you have that ability for both teams to have a very strong bond between one another, shared responsibilities, shared prioritization, is when you can achieve really great things together. And I think that's the responsibility of data and analytics practitioners, which is you have to raise the floor of the maturity of the data and analytics organization, not just within your teams, but also outside of your teams. And how are you enabling that is going to determine a lot of this. And I think a lot of it is going to be from people taking their own personal interests and ambitions into the mix as well. I have met a lot of functional people who work in different personas, everything from demand planners to marketing associates and others, who've essentially come to me and said, hey, I'm doing a few courses related to analytics in my own time. I'm learning Python. I'm learning how to do a few different AI courses, etc. And I think this is all a step in the right direction, because all of these will really democratize how we are looking at some of these capabilities. And of course, it raises that floor, but it also raises the ceiling by challenging technical teams to really go that much further in supporting your functional and core business organizations that are really driving that top and bottom line value for the P&L. And now, moving to the AI aspect, right? So this is, a point in time where we've got obviously this inflection, right? And of course, this is not the first point in time when this happened. We've seen the first industrial revolution when you really had quite a bit of that productivity unlocked from agricultural tasks and more manual tasks that were occurring within a lot of the population. You saw the second industrial revolution, which was really driven by electrification, which brought in quite a bit of that gain that we see, right? So in this period about 150 years ago, when the world started to undergo electrification, it really transformed the lives of individuals, the work that they were doing, and how industries were able to make and serve different products and services to people. Um, of course, we're still in the middle of this third industrial revolution, which is the computing revolution, which started about 70 years ago with modern computing, with having the ability um, to to use processing power, and use that to solve some of your complex problems. Of course, there's been an exponential increase in that, which I will speak about shortly as well. And where we are today is, of course, the is being talked about as the fourth industrial revolution, which is essentially this age of AI and the cognitive intelligence. So this really is a step change from the previous revolutions and the previous states that we've been. Of course, it remains to be seen if it is going to be as transformational as some of the other revolutions were, and what that's going to bring with it. But if any of the early indicators are good signs of it, I think we all know that this has a huge impact on what it can mean for everybody's occupations, their personal and professional lives, and how we consume different information, but also how industries and enterprises are shaping up for this new AI-driven space, and how that creates potentially new products and services. So this is a good schematic, which a graph which talks about um, how we've really seen an increase from this third to the fourth industrial revolution, right? So the real increase in the computation abilities of what we would call intelligent systems. Intelligent systems have existed not just in the past year or two, but they've existed for the past 70 years, and we've had different systems doing that. But of course, the computational ability has really expanded exponentially, as you can see here, and that acceleration has really happened in these past few years. So if you see, there's been a bit of a straight line graph of how we've evolved in various aspects, and this chart just talks about a few different processes like handwriting recognition, image recognition, reading comprehension, etc., and how these have evolved over time. And of course, there's been a significant exponential increase which has happened in this last 5 to 6 years, which has driven the case for where we are today. And if you see what this means, right? So this obviously means that there's going to be a significant amount of disruption. And what are the industries that are going to undergo some of this disruption is going to be determined by what kind of tasks are really prevalent within those industries. So if you're looking at the retail industry or healthcare industry, it's going to be quite different from what it means for a banking or an insurance. But there is clearly a lot of disruption that's going to happen from automation. So there's going to be some which will undergo or have been undergoing some of that disruption already, and there are some which will continue to see that change in a more tempered manner as we go forward within this evolution. And what this really is going to mean for the world is a boost, as we're anticipating, right? So some research indicates that this is going to mean a 7% increase in the GDP. And of course, all of this is great for the collective whole of us, not just as industry professionals, but also as people, families, communities are all going to see the value that's coming from these with AI. Today, though, a lot of what we're speaking about when we think AI is going to be related to cost, right? So a lot of us are thinking through what are the cost implications? What are the productivity benefits that I think we're only just scratching the surface related to how this is going to increase revenue. I think there's a huge opportunity here for us to not just evolve into this cost side, cost, productivity, and efficiency side of things, but also into how this can potentially evolve into new revenue streams, right? Good examples of these are in the biotech, pharmaceutical, and medical space as well, which where you're seeing a lot of drug development, drug discovery. You're seeing a lot of innovation, some of it accidental as well, happening through many of the AI models that have been out there. I had an opportunity to spend some time with a good friend of mine who works in the ophthalmology space, in research, and they were talking about how they discovered as an accidental outcome from one of their deep learning models the ability to identify certain patterns of how retina disease and retina challenges can be identified before the fact. And this is something that wasn't their objective function. So you're seeing a lot of these kinds of developments happening in many industries. And I think there's a lot more that we're going to see, which will really add to the other side of this equation, which is generating new revenue potential, new business streams, and really new ideas and new industries. I would maybe liken this to what we saw in the past 100 years or so. In the late 1890s to the early 1900s, you saw this refrigeration evolution, right? So for having refrigerators, which you can have in your homes, and that led to the creation of or that led to really the explosion of industries like the sodas and the beer sales, etc., which have dominated the markets for a while now. So you see companies like Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Anheuser-Busch and others, which have really been large companies which have benefited from this revolution in refrigeration, right? So if you think of what AI can do as an enabler, what new businesses, what new products is it going to enable? I think it's going to be the question that we're all going to have to grapple with within our own industries. So when I think about these benefits, as I was alluding to, I think about three different buckets of these, right? So AI has the ability to drive transformational benefits, of course. And I think that a large part of the public discourse and the conversation today is really driven in this productivity aspect, which I mentioned. But I think there's a huge opportunity for us to get into this sharper decision making. How are we making better decisions? How are we moving the needle from decision making to those higher degrees of sophistication which we haven't had in the past? So this may mean if you're working on forecasting algorithms, the reduction of bias and the increase in accuracies. This may mean if you're looking at segmentation use cases and problem statements, how you're better segmenting some of your consumer cohorts to make them far more likely to either purchase products or be likely to consume a certain service. And of course, I spoke about the creativity aspect, which is really, how can you use AI to do a lot of the research and development efforts towards creation of new products, whether physical or digital, and how can it enable those? I think is going to be important. So really, we need to think about AI as not just an ability to cut some time or some of the processes, the manual, repetitive, mundane activities that we're undergoing. Yes, that is a large part of what we're doing today. But yes, there is a lot more beyond that into how we can enable better decision making with AI as well. And I would probably end with the three tenets that I often talk about, which is every initiative, every problem statement, every task and process has to be related to the value that you're driving, especially if you work in the corporate and the enterprise space. This is something which is going to be imperative. Of course, if you work in academia or research, you do have an ability to work on certain work streams where the quantification of value may not be as direct. But I think you've got to associate all the data analytics and AI initiatives with the commercial value that you're able to bring, right? Is it top line value that you're able to drive? Is it savings that you're able to drive? Productivity benefits we spoke about as well. But you've got to be obsessed with value when you think about anything in this data analytics and AI space. And it's not just an imperative. You will be challenged to do that. We are in a macroeconomic environment which is going to demand that you provide a certain ROI, which is going to be commensurate with the investments that you are seeking for AI. So it's imperative we think about ROI, we think about value associated with each of these solutions that we're looking to build and deploy. The other one that I would talk about is related to what I would call the inverted pyramid of AI investment. So this model suggests that organizations need to spend 70% of their resourcing and their effort behind driving organizational change, 20% on the tooling or platforms, and 10% really on models and algorithms, right? So it's really inverting what conventional wisdom has been within this AI space over the past several years now. And this really drives home the point that a model or an output of a model in itself in isolation does not drive any benefit. You need to have the right processes in place. You need to have the right transformation agenda in place. You need to have the right people in place in order to enable this change. And that's going to really turn that notional value that you are potentially deriving from these AI driven solutions into real value. And that's when you can really complete this cycle and go forward in your evolution of AI. And I'd say the third probably one of the most important ones amongst these tenets is going to be this fail fast, scale fast mentality. You've got to build a culture of encouraging experimentation, build a lot of POCs, really rapidly, and essentially looking at which of those are gonna fail and which will scale. If there are any that aren't performing according to your expectations, then we've got to take the learnings from those and move on. And if there are any that are working well, it's our responsibility to really take that forward and scale that across other parts of the organization, in other geographies, business units, functions, etc. So really, the impetus on failing fast starts from an experimentation mindset and a culture of encouraging that, and really taking that to the next level with these initiatives that work well. So I had someone who's a practitioner who once asked me, "How do you really know what fails fast, and what is the percentage of products that you would be open to a certain degree of failure with?" Right? I would say that I think of it as an investor. So if you're a private equity investor, as an example, you may invest in 10 different companies, and maybe one of those has an ability to become the next unicorn, and maybe nine of those fail, right? So you've got to think of it as an investor managing a portfolio, which is what is the probability of success that you have with some of these products, and how do you encourage that ability to really identify which ones are working well, which ones aren't, to really take them forward. Yeah. So that's pretty much it for my presentation. Thank you, and open to any questions, and over to Richie as well.
All right, super. Thank you very much, Arun. I really like that last point you made, that you're probably going to try a lot of different things with AI, and most of them are going to be stupid and maybe not work. But like, if you get one that works, then that's probably going to deliver huge benefits. You just got to keep trying things until you get that big return. That's wonderful. Okay, so we have quite a few questions from the audience. The one I want to start with, we're going to take a short digression from talking about decision making and AI, because at the start, when you mentioned that you've been working with Ben and Jerry, so quite a few comments just on ice cream. So maybe can you just take a moment to talk about just I can't remember your job title. It was like head of super premium ice cream or something like that. Can you just talk a bit about what does ice cream analytics involve?
Yeah, so let me start with an anecdote that I think the audience will enjoy. So we've there's a lot of different analytics that goes into obviously associating how you're selling your products, and what different levers and what different variables are affecting those sales. So one that I think was very interesting that we found was that cloud cover has a higher probability at determining ice cream sales than does precipitation. So what that means is that when it may be raining, or in certain cases snowing, you might anticipate that ice cream sales will drop automatically. But when it is cloudy, there is a higher likelihood that ice cream sales drop. So people are purchasing ice cream even if it's raining or even if it's snowing sometimes, but not as likely to purchase it when it's a cloudy day. So there's a few different nuggets of anecdotal analytics insights that have come out of there. But yes, I agree with the commenter that Ben and Jerry's is the best, 100%. I was happy to be part of the team that brought Ben and Jerry's to the number one ice cream brand in the in-home market in the US many years ago, and it's stayed at that position. I will say that I've probably not had a chance to try out all the 55 plus flavors that are out there, but I'm probably at 90% or so. So I do enjoy.
That feels like a good life goal to try and complete the set. That is fascinating. I am now very curious about who is eating ice cream when it's snowing, but I guess that there are people. Okay, brilliant. So we've got a few more questions from the audience already. For everyone else in the audience, we got plenty of time. So if you think of any more questions, then please do ask them in the chat now. All right. So we've got a very nice question from Vaselin saying, How do people approach decision making without AI, and how do you hope to resolve this with AI? So yeah, can you do a comparison? What's the difference with and without AI?
Yeah, great question, Wes. So, what I'd say is that essentially we're all on this path to enable data driven decision making, right? Ultimately, I believe that data driven decision making leads to better decision making, right? Now, what you see with AI is obviously it enabling a different or a higher degree of sophistication in that data driven decision making. And what would have happened in the past is probably experience based or gut based decision making. And I've seen this play out. So let me give you a real world example that plays out quite often. Um, you may be in a meeting where a certain investment decision has to take place. There is a particular solution that might have a particular recommendation on what it suggests you to do, right, for that investment. Now, if that solution, as an example, does not have a certain explainability built into it, so let's say it's a black box solution, right? I've had in certain cases a finance leader or another functional leader say, well, how did this elasticity number come to be? And if you don't have that elasticity numbers explainability built into your solution, then within a few minutes you're essentially eroding a lot of the trust and credibility that you built, right? So you're then going back to the time when that decision is going to take place based on the gut or the experience of the individuals in the room, and they're essentially going to sidestep the data driven decision that the solution is recommending, which might be completely different. So I think we've got to guard ourselves against this, which is you've got to continue progressing this journey of data driven decision making, and there's a real impact of really going back to the earlier days and doing things based on how we did, which I'm not saying it's wrong or bad. I think experience is really what drives a lot of the decision making and did in the past. But I think what we're trying to establish is that the data has that experience. The data has all of those anomalies built in the past. So you now have the ability to bring in your subjective knowledge and information along with what the data is telling you to make those decisions.
I like that. So it's mixing kind of real experience, but then also maybe intuition, but then also using the data as well. And there's going to be a bit of back and forth between the two. Okay. We've actually got a few more questions on similar sort of things around applications. So this one comes from Alexander saying, can you give an example where AI, I don't think it has to be GPT-4, but some example of AI giving insights into business processes, and you've got some kind of win from it.
Yeah. So I'd say that common LLM use cases are related to where you have a lot of unstructured data. So take customer service as an example, right? So customer service has a lot of data that you're collecting. Some of it has data related to user sentiment. Some of it has data related to how users are dealing with certain challenges. And you are coming through, you're essentially getting all of that data streaming through, right? So you can use an LLM to essentially bring the insights from those from that trove of information that you have, and you can summarize, you can contextualize, you can segment, and you can essentially use the outputs of what predefined solutions you may suggest for customer service representatives as one example, to do that far more efficiently. So what it does is today you have the ability to augment humans who are performing that task with the LLM, which is going to give you far more insight into that. And you can then crash that cycle of, let's say, a customer service representative who might take in the past 7 to 9 minutes on a call to resolve a customer complaint, but today you might be able to do it in 2 to 3 minutes. So you're really unlocking that remainder of the time, and when you start building the volume of the calls that you get, this productivity benefit starts increasing exponentially.
That's fascinating. And certainly the idea of having better customer support using generative AI has been something that a lot of businesses have been talking about recently.
Yeah.
I actually have a tricky technical question for you. So I was recently recording an episode of the Data Frame podcast. It's going to be coming out later this year on causal AI. And so there's this Danish professor talking about how generative AI is brilliant for doing these sort of productivity improvement tasks. When it comes to decision making, you need to use causal AI techniques. And we've had things like structural equation modeling and causal Bayesian networks for a while, but have not quite made their way into the boardroom. This is something that needs to happen. I don't know. Do you have any experience with causal AI? Is this something you've come across at Unilever or elsewhere?
Yeah. So that's a great one. I think I'd go back to a friend and a fellow data and analytics practitioner who mentioned to me that there is a strong correlation between beer and diaper sales within Walmart, as an example. But that does not mean that there's a causal relationship between beer and diaper sales. So I think the starting point for this is obviously the understanding between a correlation relationship and a causal relationship. Causals are rarely established with data alone. Causals require that business knowledge and understanding to establish the connections between those. So to the examples you mentioned, Richie, so if you're using like a Bayesian belief network as an example, along with neural nets to solve a particular problem, you will need the people who are essentially fine tuning that algorithm to blacklist and whitelist relationships like these, right? So you might see a beer and a diaper relationship that's established by the data, but you'll need to blacklist that because you will need to use your business understanding to say, this isn't a causal for me. And that will drive this blacklisting and whitelisting, this whole fine-tuning process will really drive a lot more of that efficiency that you're looking to gain. So yes, within data alone, it's very difficult to establish causals, and especially with AI, I think. And we were talking about LLMs before. So LLMs are notoriously challenging to determine causals with, because there's so many hallucinations, which is essentially another way of overfitting models, right? So you've got to be really careful in establishing that feedback loop on where it's sourcing from, what are the causals that you're establishing, and that comes from a combination of that business and technical understanding.
That's fascinating. And just we've come again to the idea that you need both data skills and business skills and bring them together. So we've got quite a few questions around the idea of these purple people. I've got one for you as well. Just one of the things you mentioned was that one of these important skills is being able to ask a good question. It's very dear to my heart. I spend a lot of time asking questions. So do you have any advice on how to ask a good question?
Yeah, I think you've got to structure your line of thinking when you have a certain problem statement in front of you, which essentially establishes what are the core foundational objectives, what are the outcomes that you're looking for, and you've got to build an entire mind map. When you're looking at a new problem statement, and of course it's going to be fascinating for me if somebody says your problem statement comes with an entire set of descriptions that answers all questions. More often than not, it doesn't, right? And that's where the strength of that questioning really comes to play, which is which I think is where as a practitioner of data and AI, you're also setting the right expectations, right? So I'd say, especially in this hype cycle that we're in the past year or so, you've got a lot of different expectations from probably the non-technical community about what LLMs can do and how AI can really transform their jobs. Right? Part of your job and our job, everyone's jobs, is essentially to democratize that information and that knowledge, and to really sort of peel the layers back of the onion and say, these are the things that are possible today, and these are the things that aren't possible yet, and here's what it will take us to get there. So I think asking the right questions, especially in terms of establishing expected outcomes, establishing the right fundamentals, success criteria, etc., are going to be very important, and forming a mental map of that, I think, is going to be critical going into that.
I like that. So really, a lot of it is about just making sure that the question and answer situation is going to lead to something useful at the end of it. Like you have to imagine, can someone actually answer this question? Is it going to help the project, or is it just going to be a digression? Excellent. Okay, so there's related to that, we have a question from the audience. So Inda asks, you mentioned several soft skills for a purple role. So yeah, can you just elaborate on the key business and technical skills you believe would make you a good purple person?
Yeah, so I'd say that the business skills that you will require are essentially going to be based on the function, based on the business unit that you serve, right? So you could be a supply chain, professional. You could be a finance professional. As a finance professional, your experience could be in FP&A, in P&Ls, in working capital, etc. So wherever your functional knowledge is, I think that's gonna obviously be your core foundational business skills, right? So, and that's going to be different for a marketeer versus a finance professional versus a supply chain professional, and it's going to be difficult for, let's say, a finance professional who's spent a certain amount of their education and experience on that domain to really go and acquire a skill of brand health. And let's say marketing related skill sets. So stick within the ones that you have and that you have an expertise within, because that is going to be valuable to drive solutions within that space. And I think from a technical standpoint, of course, that is where I spoke a little bit about the ceiling, which has really the floor and the ceiling, both of which have increased over time. So if you asked me 5 years ago in 2019 or so, what the required skills were, I'd probably say, just like when we were coming into the into the workplace and required a knowledge of Excel, maybe 10 years prior to that, everybody needs to have the experience of a Tableau or a Power BI, or ensuring that you have that skill. Today, that bar is slightly higher. You need to have, I would say, an understanding of SQL. You need to have an understanding of certain data fundamentals, right? So, what are you doing with data? It's going to be hard to say that a data engineer skills all transfer over to a purple profile, but the better you have your ability to start playing with those environments, right? So technical environments. How do you have the ability to troubleshoot some of the data pipelines? How do you build sandboxes and start experimenting with those? I think it's going to come down to that ability, combined with obviously your business experience, which can drive that. And data science is always been seen as this trifecta between statistics, computer science, and essentially business knowledge, right? So that hasn't changed, and that isn't likely to change. So having those skill sets all together, I think, is going to be a powerful concoction for what your business needs.
Absolutely. And I think we've got a few more questions on purple people. There is a comment. Oh, wrong one. Sorry. We got a comment on, I've lost it. There was another comment on purple people. Oh, sorry, from Pablo. So Pablo was saying there's a book called The Purple Cow, which is related to this, saying the way to cut the hype clutter of products and advertising is to innovate in something new and remarkable. Maybe you just want to talk a bit about how like this combination of business and technical skills helps you innovate.
Yeah, I think innovation's got to be one of the qualities that you look for, right? So I look for curiosity, passion, innovation, abilities when I'm hiring, and I think your innate curiosity to really look at what are inefficient processes, or what are inefficiencies within your surroundings, and how you plan to address that is going to be critical, right? So most of the big startups that we know, which have converted into large companies, have been because somebody has identified a spot problem and said, this is not efficient enough, we've got to have a better way to do this, right? So I think within our own ecosystems, how can we find those areas of inefficiencies? And you've got to have probably a slightly unhealthy sort of challenge with the status quo, right? So you've got to have a slight bit of discontentment with how things are today if you want to innovate. if you're going to be 100% content with everything that goes that's going on, you're probably not really spurring innovation a lot, right? So how do you manage that slight bit of discontent, that healthy challenge against the status quo, and how do you build solutions against those, and how do you really use your time efficiently with that, right? Because the number of hours that we have in a day is not increasing. The number of tasks and priorities are. So how are you ruthless with your prioritization to make certain amounts of time? Some organizations have 20% of their time dedicated to innovation, etc. Not every organization has the luxury to do that, but I think each individual has the responsibility to take that upon themselves to really clear their time, either professionally or personally, to really do that.
I do love that idea of just disgust-driven development, and I have to say I agree. Like, a lot of my best work's just been started with, "This is rubbish. I'm pretty sure I can do better." So yeah, that's some great advice there. All right, so we have a question from uh, Anna. I'm just conscious of time. There's actually quite a lot. We've got about 3 more great audience questions at the moment, so we'll try and get through them all. We might overrun by a minute or two. This one from Anna says, "Can we train AI to do predictions based on Google or metadata?" For example, yeah. Do you just want to talk about where you might get your data from and what you can do with AI?
Yeah. So I'm positive that most people in the audience have either seen or heard of the OpenAI Dev Day that happened a few days ago. And one of the examples there is essentially how you can build custom GPT models based on data that you can train it with, right? And you don't need to use a GPT-4 for that. You can use many different solutions which are essentially custom fine-tuned models based on your data, right? And that could be Google data, that could be certain data coming in from your ecosystem itself. As an example, for my own productivity suite, have a GPT based model, an LLM, which essentially does some of that private data curation, right? I also use a product called Notion, which yesterday had in its release cycle an LLM, private LLM based on your notes. So if you're a note taker and if you use Notion instead of OneNote or others, you now have an LLM where you can ask Q&As directly with it. So I think training data with your private information or your personalized content is really where it's going to be in the future, right? So we've all been fascinated by all of the consumer facing apps which have the depth of all the information across the internet. But I think the accuracies you'll get with some of the smaller data sets that you train on is going to be far more superior and going to be far more tailored to your use cases as well.
Absolutely. And for those of you who missed it yesterday, I did a webinar on all of OpenAI's recent announcements, including the idea of custom GPTs. And yeah, I think we might be able to make the recording available to you. Yeah, Reese just posted it in the chat. So if you missed it, please do check out that recording. All right. Before we go to the last couple of questions, I just want to say we've got a load more upcoming webinars that are definitely worth you joining in on. So tomorrow, we've got a session on fine-tuning the Llama 2 large language model. So you need a little bit of Python skills, but not too much. But please do join us for that if you're interested in generative AI. On Tuesday next week, we've got a session on getting started using Snowflake. Wednesday, we've got a session on AI and robotics. And next Thursday, we've got a session on the best practices for putting large language models into production. So tons of AI related and content and other sort of data warehousing content coming your way very soon. All right, last 2 questions then. So this one comes from Peter. Can you speak to multi-agent concepts to create more accurate answers to remove hallucinations, approach on decision making? So yeah, I'm not sure we necessarily need to address multi-agent stuff, but certainly how do you improve the accuracy of your answers?
Yeah, I think you're probably gonna wanna have a human in the loop, especially if you have consumer agents or consumer facing applications which are using the output of these models, right? So There's an ability, obviously, to fine tune the data specific to your data set, which can reduce the hallucinations, as opposed to if you're using entirely out of the box models. And I'd say that an experience of mine has been that smaller models with fewer parameters, which are more custom trained for your domain, have better accuracies than the large language models with the many more billions of parameters, which are trained on much larger data sets. So I think training your data set or fine tuning it is going to be very important on specificity and reducing hallucinations.
That's really interesting. The idea that the data set that you use is sometimes more important than the type of model you use. Okay, so for those of you who are interested, one of the techniques for reducing hallucinations is called retrieval augmented generation. We had a webinar on it, I think it was last month, maybe the month before, and I think there's going to be another one coming up in December. It'll be announced shortly. So if you're interested in this, then please do look out for that. Retrieval augmented generation, that's the phrase you need. Okay, and then last question from Nayab. Can you give some examples of business decisions that machine learning models are better equipped to answer than rule-based systems?
Yeah, so
it could be a big list.
Yeah, we can really make a list. I think the one that comes to mind, the one that's top of mind is that retina example, which somebody mentioned in the healthcare, a friend mentioned in the healthcare space, right? So the your traditional conventional wisdom of how you detect retina disease is going to be based on the last 200 years of medical knowledge and information. But your data-driven model is going to go against the rule-based model, and I actually suggest a completely different approach. And I think that's one of the examples. But I think in my business and in other businesses, there are many areas where rules are essentially based on your knowledge from the past and your, in certain cases, the strength of your documentation. And we know that that has human limitations, and of course we're going to continue to augment those with AI.
All right, fantastic. So yeah, certainly lots of use cases for even like simple neural networks or simple machine learning models in business. We'll cover lots more of them in future webinars, I'm sure, so please do come back. All right, with that, we are way past time. So thank you very much, Arun. That was really informative. Lots of great answers there. Thank you to Reese for moderating. Thank you to everyone who asked a question. I know there were a few questions coming at the last minute. Sorry we couldn't get to them. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. I hope to see you again tomorrow or next week for our future sessions. All right, goodbye.